Thank you, Mr. Davis, for taking us through Gardner's multiple intelligences and Spearman's single intelligence G. Now we're going to talk about how it's measured. If you see that headline up there, I'm going to take you through this somewhat quickly, but really we're still talking about this even though it was created over 100 years ago. There's a man in France named Binet, and he created a test. And one of the things that was happening is in France, they were starting to educate everybody. And they wanted to figure out what kids needed extra help. How are they going to figure this out? So they created a test, and then they gave everybody an intelligence quotient. And if you remember quotient from math, it has to do with a division problem. It has to do with a fraction. And here's what they would do. They would look at the child's mental age, and they would compare it to their chronological age. Chronological age is easy, right? You know how old you are. How do we figure out mental age, though? How do we do that? And what he would do is he would give a whole bunch of 9-year-olds the same test. He would see how they scored. He'd say, here's the 9-year-old average. Where do other people score related to this test? They worked on it for a while, and they developed something called the Stanford-Binet. And really, we still have that Stanford-Binet intelligence test right now. They test it differently, though. Or excuse me, they score it differently. So let's take a look at how it's scored. This is IQ, intelligence quotient. So again, it was mental age and chronological age. So let's say you are 9 years old and you score what an average 9-year-old scores. Then you would be, look at this, 9 divided by 9 is 1 times 100 is 100. So your IQ would be 100. 100 is the midpoint. But let's say your chronological age is 10. Let's just make it simple. And you scored like a 15-year-old. That's great. That would mean that your IQ, if you're doing the math in your head, is 150. So it would be 15 divided by 10 equals 1.5 times 100 is 150. That's a high IQ. So you can see they could just figure out this quotient, and then they could kind of put people on a list. Here are some of our more intelligent kids. Here are some of our kids who need some help. They would do an IQ. It's not how it's scored anymore. We have now standardized scores based on the normal distribution. Now we're going to go back and we're going to take a look at the normal curve, the bell curve, the normal distribution, and that is how we score intelligence tests now. And again, this is not a measure of your intelligence that is static. It is not a measure of how smart you are. It's a measure of where you relate in relation to other people, how smart you are in relation to other people. And you'll see that here in a minute. So what you see here is basically if we gave you an IQ test, and you might even want to pause this and look at this some more. If we gave you an IQ test, here's what the scores would look like. There would be very few scores down here. There would be very few scores down here, and there would be a ton of scores in here. 68% of the scores would be in here in the normal distribution. So all they're doing, and again, you might want to rewind this and watch this again so I don't have to keep explaining it, but every standard deviation is 15 points on IQ. So if you are, here's the mean, median, and mode right here. If you are one standard deviation below the mean, you are at an 85. That is your IQ. If you are one standard deviation above the mean, that means you are a 115. Now remember, going back, standard deviation is the average distance between each point and the mean. So, but in a normal curve, in a bell curve, it's always going to be the same. So pretty much every test that you take is going to be on this right here. So let's take a look at this. Let's say you took an IQ test and you scored a 115. That's good. That's good. Now, here's the question. How many people scored higher than you did? And all you have to do is add it up. 14 plus 2 plus 0.1. So a little over 16% of the people scored higher than you on the IQ test. And then about 84%-ish scored lower than you. So it doesn't, you can't just say, my intelligence is 115. What the heck does that mean? All it means is that compared to other people who took the test, that's where you are. So intelligence tests aren't saying how smart you are. They're just saying how you rank according to other people. Now, let's say you scored a 70. Whoa, that's rough. How many people scored lower than you? Only about 2% of people scored lower than you did. So knowing this, you can figure out a lot about where you rank with other people. So we would call this, if you were at 115, we would say you're in the 86th percentile. That's what they call it now. That's what percentiles mean. If you scored 145, that would mean you're in the 99th percentile. So again, all these numbers are telling you is where you relate to other people. And going back, this is how your IQ is determined now. It is not chronological age and mental age. It is this right here. They put you in a normal curve, in a bell curve, and they relate you to other people. Okay. Now, if you are in the lower 2%, we looked at that 70 IQ. They would call that intellectual disability. They would say that, they used to have some worse terms for that, but now we would say this person needs a lot of extra help, which really was originally the point of an IQ test. And then they would say you are gifted if you are in the upper 2%. Now, I want to back up, though, and say gifted in District 81 schools, I don't remember, but I think the cutoff for Tessera was in the top 10%. So giftedness kind of depends on who's measuring it. Tessera is the advanced program in our district. I think if you're in the top 10%, you got into Tessera. I don't remember exactly what that was. But all we need to do then is if we see that bell curve, all we need to do is figure out what's our cutoff, and every kid above 1 point is going to be in, maybe the gifted program. Every kid below this point is going to get some extra help. So again, we look at that bell curve to make those determinations. Now, we're going to talk about two different types of tests, and then, let's see, I'm about 6 minutes, so we're good. The achievement test, well, actually, I'm going to put both of them up. Achievement and an aptitude test. I'm going to talk about the difference, and you might want to write this in your notes. Our AP psychology test is an achievement test. They're seeing what you've achieved in the year this year. This is not about your general intelligence or your ability to learn. It's saying what you have learned. So AP tests are achievement tests. Most of the tests you've taken in your life, though, are what's called aptitude tests. And it simply means, do you have the capacity to learn? What is that? I mean, do we have a diamond in the mine that we just need to go down and get? So that was the theory of an aptitude test. And the IQ test is considered, it's not a pure aptitude test, but it is considered an aptitude test. What's your ability to learn? Not what have you learned. So this is, again, maybe write it in your notes. This is what have you learned. This is what you have the ability to learn. So we're going to talk a little bit more about some classic aptitude tests coming up. SAT is an aptitude test. All of your state tests are aptitude tests. All of your, your ACT tests are aptitude tests. So this is mostly what you take in this. An achievement test would also be something like the bar exam for a lawyer or the boards for a doctor, something like that. Okay, now let's take a look at what we mean by a standardized test. And I think a lot of you think that a standardized test means that you take it on a Scantron, that you fill in a bubble sheet. It's not what it means. Standardized simply means that everybody takes the exact same test at the exact same time in the exact same way. So, even an essay can technically be a standardized test. Your AP essays that you have on the AP psychology exam are going to be standardized, meaning that you're all taking it, I think, at 1 o'clock this year. You're all taking the same test. They're going to be scored in the same way. So if we have everything remaining equal, we can then compare you. And that's kind of what we're doing. We're not saying how smart you are. We're just seeing how you scored in relation to other people who took the test. And now let's just take a look at this, and then I'm going to let Mr. Davis take over. Let's take a look at the WACE. And I'm going to move this. Take a look, and you might even want to pause to see some of the things on a classic standardized test that you might be asked. So we have verbal subtests, where we're going to ask general knowledge questions, repeat a list of numbers. This is memory, comprehension over here. And this is where it gets in, because think about this. What if you're an English language learner? How's that going to go? It's going to be tougher. But in this, you don't even need to speak English in order to do well on the test. So actually, I'll show you a couple of slides here so you can see the kinds of things we're looking for. if we're really trying to see what your aptitude is, but you don't speak English very well, you might be super intelligent, but you just don't speak the language of the test. So there are certain tests, especially over here our district gives something called the Raven Progressive Matrices test, where you don't even have to be able to read in order to do the test. But we want to find out, are you smart even if you haven't been taught to read yet? Because reading is something that is taught. So if you want to pause and take a look at more of these, you can. But let's take a look at this. So for instance, and you can go ahead and try to solve that. But here's the goal. And we're trying to say, what three pieces can you put together here to make that? Boy, that'll take some time. But again, you don't have to read to be able to do this. All we have to do is be able to explain to you what to do in this task. And you can go ahead and figure that out. Oops, I thought I already had that, but that's fine. That's great. So this is an example of something on that right side of the test. Let me go back here. That would be an example of something over here where we might check your intelligence based on something where you didn't have to read. All right, I'm kind of rambling, so I'm going to head out and let Mr. Davis take over from here.